The Prime Minister began this week talking trade and tariffs with U.S. President Donald Trump at the G7.
I'm a tariff person. I've always been a tariff. It's simple, it's easy, it's precise, and it just goes very quickly. And I think Mark has a more complex idea, but also very good. So we're going to look at both, and we're going to see what we're going to come out with something, hopefully.
Well, the something that came out of that meeting is a goal for a new deal within 30 days, and that sets the deadline for about the 16th of July. And today, the Prime Minister announced measures to help Canada's steel and aluminum industries deal with the President's 50% tariffs that were imposed 2 weeks ago.
We must reinforce our strength at home and safeguard Canadian workers and businesses from the unjust U.S. tariffs that exist at present. Steel and aluminum workers are on the front line of this trade crisis. These are the workers who will help us build one strong Canadian economy, the strongest economy in the G7.
And all of this is happening as the government is trying to push its legislation to fast-track major national projects and drop domestic trade barriers through the House by tomorrow. A lot to discuss with our panel of journalists. Robert Fife is the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail. And here with me in the studio, Mia Rabson is Deputy Parliamentary Bureau Chief at the Canadian Presse. And Joël-Denis Bellavance is the Parliamentary Bureau Chief for La Presse. Bob, so much going on. It looks like you had to flee the city. Let's start with the G7. I mean, what did you make of how that ended? I mean, we got a 30-day deadline. And while Trump left early, he didn't leave in a huff. And after Charlevoix, that seems like a big win. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I thought that the Prime Minister handled himself very well at the G7. These conferences and summits usually don't bring about a lot of great major achievements. They're an opportunity for the leaders of the industrialized democracies to talk about issues that are important for these countries and to put out statements that are often ignored pretty quickly. But the fact of the matter is that Donald Trump came to this summit. He did leave early, mind you, but he came to the summit, and there were really no significant flare-ups other than a couple of backhanded slaps at the French President Macron from Donald Trump. That, by any judgment, is a roaring success because anybody knows when Trump shows up at any summit of his of close American allies, it usually doesn't go very well, as it did back in 2018 for Justin Trudeau.
You know, Mia, it's interesting that we've seen Mark Carney now, and he's going to have a First Minister's meeting tomorrow, or at least a call. He's handling that table pretty well, and he handled the G7 table pretty well, by all accounts.
He has. I mean, I was saying to JD earlier, it's sort of this magic that he seems to bring, whether it's because people have confidence in him, whether it's because he's actually working on action, doing things that are tangible, and he wants to move quickly. He's sort of saying the things that people want to hear, at least around those tables. I mean, he has a lot of critics on some of the other things he's doing, moving too fast on C5, for example. You know, it's not necessarily going to be an easy ride for him this summer from other places. But at the two tables that Justin Trudeau struggled the most with, which was Donald Trump and the premiers, Mark Carney is certainly nailing it on both fronts right now. You know, everyone on those two, and that those two groups seem to be quite pleased with how he's done. And yeah, I mean, Donald Trump didn't leave in a huff. I mean, yes, the bar on that might have been really low, that him not leaving in a huff was a success. But you know, it wasn't just that he didn't leave in a huff. He actually was praising the Prime Minister. He was praising the G7. You know, I don't really want to go, but I have to. I mean, there is some issues in the Middle East that he did have to deal with. So, yeah, I mean, for Mark Carney, in terms of walking away from a G7 feeling good, I think he should feel good about how that went.
JD, what's your analysis of how it all went?
Well, you know, we're at the end of the school year. We tend to grade students. We give them, you know, good grades. So I'm going to give Mr. Carney a grade on this one. I think he deserves at least a B+ or an A- in terms of handling Donald Trump and keeping some kind of cohesion among the G7 countries. And you saw also Mr. Carney, I think he's a good fox, if I may say, in the sense that he's trying to draw closer to key countries that are reliable. He got the Prime Minister of Great Britain 24 hours earlier before the summit to, wine and dine and watch the hockey game, so you get, closer.
That didn't go too well. The hockey game
I
went
know, but the Oilers
sideways. That was
win,
definitely
but-
the worst part of it, yeah.
But he is trying to also send some message that Canada can get alliances on its own without the United States. There's the United States, but we've got other allies on which we can rely. And I saw also the kind of communication Mr. Carney had with Emmanuel Macron, the French president. They give themselves hugs. They know each other for a while. And then that just shows that the kind of communications or the links between the the three leaders is very, very good. So all in all, I would say that for Mr. Carney, this is a success. And he's building political capital on which he wants to spend it eventually, but he's building political capital and goodwill, I would say.
Well, Bob, he's going to need political capital with the United States, right? And with whatever comes out of this 30-day deadline. Because, Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, all of those relationships, those are fine. And those are not countries punishing Canadian workers and consumers with their trade policy. So when you look at this 30-day deadline or timeline, whatever it is that because they're optimistic of a deal? Is it because they want to draw a line in the sand on the shenanigans and just get some clarity? I mean, how do you view it and handicap the chances they might get something by
Well,
then?
it's very difficult for us to know because there's been a shroud of secrecy over these negotiations. There are a very small group of people who know what's exactly being negotiated with the Americans. We have sort of broad outlines, of course, but the actual details, because the president says, well, I like tariffs. Mark's got a good idea too, but it's very complex. And what is that complexity? We just don't know. But from standing from outside, we can see that the Prime Minister is ticking off some boxes. He ticked off the 2% of GDP for national defense. Today, he's ticked off a box to stop dumping of mainly Chinese, Vietnamese, steel from other countries, in India, for example, and to show the Americans that if we get any kind of deal with them on steel and aluminum, they cannot use Canada as a backdoor to get into the U.S. market. I think we're just beginning to see the broad outlines of a deal here. But you and I are not at the table. But the fact that they are talking, the fact that the president speaks highly of the Prime Minister Carney, and the fact that they have had themselves private conversations about the deal that's unfolding, and the fact that the Treasury Secretary spent the full 2 days at the G7 summit was clearly a signal that other things were going on with the Americans and the Canadians and maybe the Mexicans to try to work out some kind of an arrangement. The deadline is tight, and all we can do is wish the Prime Minister success in trying to get a deal.
Yeah, and look, there's a meeting tomorrow, I believe, in Washington between Dominic LeBlanc, Kirsten Hillman, and Jameson Greer and others, and it's interesting, Mia, like Trump said that I have a simple thing, Mark's is more complex. The Prime Minister was asked, and he goes, well, complexity is in the eye of the beholder, is kind of what he said. And it may just be, a trade deal, because that is more complicated than tariffs. The secrecy, Bob's right. I mean, bad for us, maybe good for Canada? I mean, what do you think of the 30 days and where they are on that?
I mean, every government likes to say they don't want to negotiate in public, and then they just do so through background sources and channels. And that's just not happening in this case.
Not at all.
Which suggests that maybe they are taking it a bit more seriously and that they don't want leaks, because any kind of leaks also, particularly with this president and this White House, could go south very, very fast. And I think they are aware of that. And so they don't want to mistakenly upset the apple cart by allowing some information out that shouldn't get out or, could affect these negotiations. It's clear they're taking it seriously. I'm finding it very interesting that it seems in many ways these are negotiations that ultimately are happen at the highest level between the Prime Minister and the President directly. That I don't remember happening ever before. They might have had some conversations, but the fact that there does seem to be this regular back and forth where they're discussing it is super interesting, and it's also a sign of the approach that this Prime Minister has. He is a hands-on Prime Minister. He is not a Prime Minister that sits back and waits for people to tell him what's going on and him tick off, yes, let's do this and let's do that. That is not the style of this Prime Minister. I think it's a different style than Canada has been used to in the past, and we'll see what the success is. 30 days isn't a long time. They sort of warned today that if we don't have a deal by mid-July, then Canada will do more on steel and aluminum tariffs to retaliate. But he's giving that the time that it seems that he thinks is needed to come up with an actual deal and not just any kind of like slap some tariffs on the table.
Yeah, JD, that direct, president to prime minister contact, I mean, it tells us a little bit about the two leaders, right? That Donald Trump, obviously a very transactional guy, fancies himself the big deal maker, wants to be part of that. Mark Carney, though, his expertise is on economics. And I think, that and what we saw at the G7 and in other things, he's very comfortable on the global stage, in these international fora, because he did all of that when he was with central banks. But, on this issue, like, he is his lead negotiator and his lead minister, as well as being the prime minister on the Canada-US thing.
And he wants results. And I think that's why he wanted to put a deadline, a firm one, a deadline. I think he also showed us today that he has a plan B. If it doesn't go, if we don't have a deal with Washington in the next 30 days, we have already some countermeasures that can be put in place very quickly so that the Americans understand that we're serious about getting a deal. Otherwise, we're going to play hardball as well. So, but I was with Mr. Carney when he did his first trip abroad to Paris and London. And in London, he also said something very interesting, that there's a limit to what we can do in terms of imposing countervailing tariffs because we're going to hurt our own economy. So are we approaching that limit with what has been announced today? I don't think so, but I think that there's a limited use of counter-terrorists that we can do to cause some problems with the United States and make Donald Trump understand that we're so integrated in terms of our economy that we cannot live with terrorists. But I remain skeptical that we will reach a deal because I think Donald Trump's mind is elsewhere.
Yes, but maybe he wants to put it behind him, maybe not. It's hard to know, right? But the economic damage is being felt on both sides of the border. And, who knows if it just leads to, I don't know, some clarity on it, right?
Canada's relentless message to the United States is that the two countries are stronger together than they are with these tariffs, and that the integration, and this message has just been, it is, for months now, this is the message that's being sent. We heard Kirsten Hillman, the U.S. our ambassador in Washington, say that she was in Alberta, and they seem like they are starting to actually get that message through to the president, and that is, I mean, if that message gets through and he finally buys into it, then there's a deal. If he doesn't, probably not.
And Mr. Carney has been very cautious in sending signals that we, yes, are dependent on the United States, but we can have alliances with other countries. Next week, he will be in the NATO summit, and before that, he will be signing that agreement with Europe to rearm Europe. That's another signal, powerful signal that he's sending to the United States. We will be part of somebody else the supply chain for military equipment if you don't treat us properly. So there are signals that Mr. Carney is sending that are very important to the United States. Will they be heard in Washington? That remains the question.
Bob, you can see the linking of all of these international summits together, right? In sort of the strategy of linking defense policy with industrial policy, paying the cover charge to sit at the big tables of 2% of defense spending as a starting point. But, when the Prime Minister says we can give ourselves far more than any other country can take away, I get the rhetorical argument there, but boy, that U.S. economy is just so massive and so big, and I just don't know if interprovincial trade barriers and finding domestic procurement options for steel and aluminum can offset just what, the further erosion of that economic relationship can do.
Look, you're absolutely right. I mean, Mark Carney can talk as tough as he wants, but the fact of the matter is, almost 80% of our trade is south of the border. We have to try to live through the Donald Trump years, and we can't just overnight diversify our trade to India or China or anywhere else in the world, or Europe for that matter. It's just the economies are too integrated. One of the most important things that are happening in the United States, unrelated to Mark Carney, is that the political, the governors and senators, including Republican senators who border the states with Canada, are now beginning to speak up about the impact of this trade war is having on their constituents and on their businesses. The U.S. business community is also speaking up much more loudly than it had originally. And I think that with the U.S. Treasury Secretary that they all have to mouth the Trump stuff, but I think behind the scenes, he's a realist, and I think he's trying to figure out a way to get Trump on side with some kind of a deal that doesn't cause significant harm to Canada, and the United States as a result of this. I mean, this is very complicated stuff because you're dealing with a president who's simple-minded about things like tariffs, and eventually the rules of economics are going to kick in when Americans have to pay more for their goods, when inflation is up, when they start losing their jobs. This is not what they bought into, but that may not happen till Christmas. It might not happen till next year, and we're already seeing the U.S. Federal Reserve Board chairman saying, well, we're not lowering interest rates because we don't know what's going to happen with these tariffs. And right now, they're not having a good effect on the American economy.
Yeah, we saw the Eastern Canadian premiers meet with the Northeastern U.S. governors. And, they're getting hammered, especially if you're in a tourism town, right? But, the president's got 19th century trade policy to pursue 20th century industrial policy, and they have a 21st century economy, and it's not really in alignment. But, Mia, all of the disruption that causes becomes sort of the central argument for the government here in the fast tracking of C5, right? Like they want to get the big projects built. They want to move it through fast. I know they sat late last night and some things were amended at committee, but there is a skepticism out there, with First Nations communities, Indigenous communities, the Inuit have some concern. What do we make of the risk-reward calculation of them moving so fast on C5?
I think to some extent this is a little bit of the Prime Minister learning how to be a politician. I mean, he's been a businessman, he's been a banker, he knows those worlds really well, but he hasn't done politics before. And so he's trying to move very quickly. And sometimes a little bit of consultation and discussion could go a long way. If this bill and the specifics of this bill, if he'd sat down with Indigenous leaders before this bill was tabled, government to government, that might have gone a long way to making them understand what the bill was actually trying to do and where they're going with it. And he's now trying to defend it, but when you're defending it from a position where people are already upset with you, you're already losing. And so I think it's a little bit of a lesson that sometimes taking a little bit of extra time might soften the blow to some extent. But he doesn't seem to be backing down at all. The Liberals, the Conservatives and the Liberals are joining on this. There's, they don't have a majority, the Liberals, but they're having no problem getting things through the House right now.
Well, with the Conservatives, it's a super majority. With the two of them joining together on everything.
Well, and the cooperation it's sort of funny. I mean, Shannon Stubbs, the MP for Alberta, made a joke in the committee last night that the Liberals voted for an amendment. She's like, that hasn't happened in 10 years. So it's, the cooperation between those two parties is actually happening, and that's kind of what Canadians wanted. I don't see him backing down, but it could be a really long summer for him. There's going to be protests.
Yeah,
there's no doubt about it.
I mean, JD, we saw, Rebecca Alty, the new Crown Indigenous Relations Minister, giving the very stark assurances that nothing happens without a recognition of your Section 35 rights and treaties and all of these things, and that language does exist in the legislation. But the speed with which this is moving has just raised a lot of doubts, and there is some legitimate historic reasons for skepticism. So there's some reassurance that's got to happen here.
Yeah, and it has to be done repeatedly for the First Nations to believe what Ottawa has to say. And it would be, I think, a welcome sign if Mr. Carney would use MPs like Mark Miller. He's a former Crown Minister responsible for Aboriginal relationship, and he's got a lot of credibility with the First Nations. Now, one of the goals also I think that needs to point out about this bill is to restore Canada's reputation as a place to do business. Because, for sure. And in the past, Canada has been described as a place where it takes an eternity to get projects approved, and so investors just went away. When you think that mine projects would take 10 to 15 years to get approved, that's too long for businesses. So I think Mr. Carney, as a business person coming from the world of economics, he wants to restore Canada's reputation as a place where you can do business and you will get a good return on your investment. And that's a key message that I think has been not told by the government with this legislation.
Yeah, so Bob, on this, right, like a lot of the criticism of it, like there's no question they campaigned on speeding things up and they got a mandate, for that. But it is the fine print of legislation that's always where the tripping points are. And even some of the critics are not saying don't do this. They're just saying, can we have an extra week? Can we have an extra 2 weeks? And, they are pressing ahead with their time frame. So, I mean, what do you see as the potential political downside here for them if they keep going this way?
Well, for certain, they did not give enough time for consultation with Aboriginal groups, that's for sure. They had very little time, but you got to remember that the projects that are going to get approved are already sitting there a lot of them have had various forms of approval and including indigenous consultation. For example, the natural gas pipeline to Kitimat, where there's an LNG facility. All they need to do, if the investor wants to do so, they could build a second LNG facility there. That is not going to be overly complicated. It's not going to cause a lot of protest. They've already approved one, so what's the problem approving another one? That's something that can happen very quickly. The uranium mine in northern Saskatchewan has had approval by the Saskatchewan government for 2 years. It's been sitting, waiting for the feds to approve it.
Right.
It's had all the environmental assessments and what that can be approved. There are quite a number of projects that they can move ahead very, very quickly if, as JD says, the people who put the money up are willing to do so. And this message in this C5 is a powerful message to the business community that Canada is open for business again. And I can tell you, I was at a conference a week ago, and there were all major business leaders there. They are really cautiously optimistic that Mark Carney is going to be a transformative leader for the Canadian economy, which he says he wants to be. We'll see that. We don't know that yet.
Yeah, and it's going to be a big calibration, right? Offering the assurances to capital while making sure, going fast doesn't mean rushing it, because that's where you run into trouble. But offering the certainty to capital when the U.S. is nothing but uncertainty right now, that's sort of the value proposition they're trying to put on the table there.